Hello, everybody. Welcome to our, I don't even know how many webinars this is. At some point, we have to number them and say, this is our 25th webinar. But on robust communication, we're even going to define that as to what that is. I am Susan Norwell. I'm the co-founder of Rett University, educational specialist, and I eat, sleep, and drink Rett, basically. Courtney, why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, I'm going to make you presenter first so that you can share your screen, because I just realized I didn't make you presenter.
Oh, yeah, so people are looking at me instead of the screen. There we go. Hey, how do you
there
like that?
Go.
All right, that works.
All right. And hi, guys. I am Courtney Barnum. I am Susan's right-hand man, and, whatever you want to call me. And I'm also a sibling of a woman with Rett. So got a couple different things here, different roles here that I play, but right now my goal is to continue keeping Susan going and keeping Rett going and kicking butt.
That's right. Keep me going. Keep me off the ice. And then with us we have Tanya. So how about if Tanya, you introduce yourself?
I'm Tanya Keller. I'm a speech language pathologist. I also have a degree in assistive tech, and I am working between Boston and San Diego right now, also licensed in Nevada and North Carolina. And I work with kids with complex communication needs and complex bodies, focusing primarily on Rett, and currently staying with one of my families here in Boston, so helping with the caregiving side of Rett as well.
And Tanya is our latest addition to our course catalog, and her course is on robust communication. So here we are. So let's take a look at what that means. So the dictionary meaning of robust is that it's something strongly constructed, something healthy and strong. I really like the fact that it's something strongly constructed, because when I look at kids' devices, before I've had a chance to do anything with them, and I find things that are kind of very loosely constructed. There's not a whole lot of rhyme or reason. People have kind of put things in they thought the kiddo would want to say, but there's no cognitive link between why this would go to here. There's a lot of research that goes into why things are located in certain places. If you look at some vocabulary systems, like if you look at Grid Supercore, and you start to try to talk with it, you really realize that there was a lot of thought in how it was constructed so that it makes logical sense how to get from one place to another. And I use that a lot. I use Supercore a lot. I use it in Norwegian. I use it in French. I use it in Spanish. And I find that, and in English primarily, but all those languages. And I find that because the organization is so strongly constructed, I can move between the languages without really being that adept. If I have a language I'm better at, it would definitely be Spanish, but definitely not French. And Norwegian is lagging behind. And then the idea of something healthy and strong, that when I think about communication, I feel so strongly about how it strengthens a person's self-concept about who they are, what they can do, and how they can advocate for themselves. And instead of presenting as a helpless individual who is dependent on other people to guess what they're trying to say, they develop a lot of strength in terms of their ability to advocate. And sometimes they tell us things that we may not want to hear, but that's okay. I had a kiddo who just moved houses, communicated with me this week that he doesn't really like where he was put in the house, and he really wished he had been consulted. That's a real important thing for him to be able to say, because his mental health isn't just about body health, strong emotional help is really, really important, really important. So what do we mean by robust communication? It's language that includes core vocabulary, fringe vocabulary, nouns, verb, descriptive words, anything that we're using, time words. Oh, I think time words are so underestimated in their importance. Like we're going to do it now, later, soon, never, always. Just those words are just so important. And then the vocabulary that might be important to the person for whatever reason. And so I just want us to think about what language would you take out of your ability to speak? So if somebody said to you, okay, today you can talk, but you cannot use a noun. You can talk, but you cannot use any descriptive words. You can talk, you cannot use any time words. It's like, we'd be like, what the heck? How am I supposed to communicate when I don't have A, B, C, and D? Well, that's how we feel about our AAC users, that all the language should be available to the person. Now, you're never going to put everything they say on that, so you cannot talk about robust communication without building writing. And so this isn't about writing, but I'm going to add this caveat that if we're going to make robust communicators, we also have to make robust writers. And that varies according to individuals, but I have a 35-year-old I'm working with who obviously listened really well in class when she was included in what letters say and the sounds they make, didn't have any access to being able to express that, but now that she does, wow, she's telling us some pretty cool things. So I just feel like I start everybody writing. People are like, well, they don't even know their letters and sounds yet. Okay, fine. Neither does that kid who picks up a pencil and starts scribbling around on a piece of paper. And we kind of are really excited when they do it. So here's the test. We don't give them very often, but here it is. Why do we insist on a robust language? How many hours of spoken language have babies heard before we expect them to speak? 84 hours? 1,800 hours? 28,000 hours? 4,380 hours? Take a guess. Let's all weigh in on how much spoken language babies have heard before we expect them to speak. So the average 18-month-old has been exposed to 4,380 hours of oral language at a rate of 8 hours a day from birth. Okay, so now let's think about that. Is spoken language going to help a child using an AAC device? Well, sure, because they're going to build up a receptive understanding of language. But what about their expressive language? They're not going to talk with their mouths. So how do we translate that 4,380 hours of oral language into modeled language? So an AAC user who receives speech therapy 2 times a week for 20 to 30 minutes will get that same amount of language exposure by the time they're 84. We would contend as a group that's too late. So I'm going to stop yakking and make sure that if anybody in my group, any of my friends here want to say something, I give them a chance to say something because I will wax eloquently about this topic. We all know.
Tanya, if you want to go ahead and talk about this slide, I pulled some of this from the information that you had given me.
Yeah. So this is one of my favorite quotes because I think too often people look at our kids and think just that. I'm in a school now where I'm kind of up against that with students who have, I came into this, 4 buttons on a screen because they have CVI, or, they don't have good eye gaze, so we're not going to try this, and they don't respond, so we're not going to give them this language. And it does result in a lot of what we're talking about here. Definitely not engaged in the device. I can't tell you how often I get, again, the student with 4 buttons on the page. Well, he's not using it. Well, he doesn't have anything to say. And it seems so counterintuitive to people, but I go ahead and I put more on the page, and now all of a sudden they're communicating. Well, because they have things to say. And I think when we limit it, we're making assumptions about what somebody might want to say, but we don't know. And we're not going to know unless we put the language out there. And if they don't have the language on their device, they're going to go to behavior to communicate because it's what's going to get the point across. And then again, I recently did a Zoom training in a district in San Diego, and I said, okay, there's a student who didn't want to ask for the glue stick. And I said, well, does he like art? And the teacher said no. So I was asking the group, what could we communicate instead? What could we do instead? And everybody came up with behavioral strategies. Use a first then board. Tell them they have to do this. Give them choices. And I had to really express, like, we're talking about communication, not behavior. We want to teach them to say, I don't want to, I don't like this, which will then reduce the behavior. The fact that the student didn't have a way to communicate that is what led to that behavior. And then we see frustration, which, think about when you're arguing with your significant other or with a parent or a sibling, or and they're not understanding you and you're not getting your point across, and you have the language to do so think about what it would be when you don't have the language to do so. It definitely limits access to learning, again, with no way to expressively communicate. Additionally, if we don't have a robust communication system, we can't be modeling the language, and modeling supports comprehension and receptive language. So now it's kind of a double whammy where they're not getting the experience to understand or use it. Others don't see the ability of the child, especially if there's always an adult communicating for them. Another peer is going to come up to the adult and they're going to see the student as much younger, or as a baby even. I've heard some peers say that because the child doesn't really have any autonomy, because the parents having to do the deciphering of the body language communication and the facial expressions, because there's not a robust system in place.
I added these two things to your slide. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Sorry, Tanya, but I feel like if they don't have a robust communication system, then we are not going to feel like we have to teach writing. Because even with a robust system, there's not everything on there, and it kind of makes you really want to know that next step. The other thing is the flip side to comprehension in terms of receptive. We don't really understand or put out there how important expressive communication is to building comprehension. So the child that holds up a pencil and says crayon, we say, oh honey, yeah, it writes like a crayon, but that's not a crayon, that's a pencil. We have no idea what their confusion is around language if they don't have it to use. We just understand that any of us that have children or have been around speaking children when they're first developing language understand the errors that they make in identifying objects or identifying what they're doing in terms of verbing or in terms of first, then, next, last positions. I on top and they're down under the table, and we go, well, actually, you might feel like you're on top of the world, but you are under the table. On top would be up here. So there's a lot of confusion that gets sorted out when people actually put out their ideas. And our kids kind of get robbed of that if they don't have enough language. So did you want to add anything else, Tanya, before I budged in there?
No, and the only other thing kind of to add to that is, if we're going to use language expressively, we need to understand it. So if we're going to use the symbols expressively on these systems, we need to understand them. Similar to the speaking child who gets exposed to 4,000 hours of language, we're giving them the symbols, which is the spoken word. We need to be doing the same thing with the picture symbols.
Yeah, and I think that it's kind of ironic that children who are assessed as being deaf at birth, they have people in there teaching those parents to sign right away. And nobody's judging cognition. Nobody's judging the parents' cognition. They're just saying, hey, you got to really just immerse them in this signing so they have a way to communicate. And yet we don't, and I'm not saying that they shouldn't. All I'm saying is, how do we know if they have a cognitive impairment? Nobody knows that. Things tend to go together. I don't really care if they have one or not. That's my view. My sense is that if you don't give them the language, you're just going to make them more cognitively impaired, because then they can't communicate. So tell us a little bit about.
Hold on. I want to step back to that frustration and behavior, because the young man, like she said, with the glue stick, I I had a student way back when where they screamed literally all day from the moment they got off the bus until the end of the day. And we started out with giving them an I don't want to page. I don't want to. I don't like that. I don't. And everybody's like, what are you doing? I said, I'm giving them I'm letting them have opinions. And they're like, well, then they're just going to say, I don't want to do everything. I don't want to do the work. I don't want to. Okay. And I will say this every day, I want everyone to tell me what they say when that alarm goes off in the morning. We do not sit there and say, yippee-yi-yay, we get to get out of bed right now at 5 a.m. in the morning or whatever time we get up. We go, oh my God, I don't want to. And then we do it anyhow. And so it's using them, teaching them how to negate or to say, I don't want to, and then saying, okay, I understand that. We're going to do one more, or we're going to do a little bit. And then we can say we're done. But giving them that opinion and giving them that option and that choice and that that autonomy for themselves, that they're not just sitting there being compliant little robots. That's not what we're trying to do with our children. We're trying to raise children who can stand up and advocate for themselves.
Yeah, and I think that,
and it's respectful. I mean, we're trying to be respectful of them. And the other thing that's so frustrating is I get, well, he doesn't like anything. Well, if he doesn't like anything, why are we working on requesting? Let's start with protest. Let's start with social. There's this mindset out there that we need to start with concrete objects and you need to tell me what you want. Well, maybe you're motivated more to tell me what you don't want. So I'm going to teach you how to tell me that. And so many teachers, I have a child with an eye gaze device with cerebral palsy in one of my classrooms, and she is not using her device a lot, and she's not answering the numbers question her teacher's asking her. And her teacher and I get into it because I'm thinking, well, don't use her device to do that. She doesn't want to do it. Let her protest with it, do it off device, and use the device for communication so she can talk about how she doesn't want to do this. It's not, communication isn't so you can say what somebody else wants you to say. And I think there's a lot of staff out there that still get stuck in this.
Yeah, and I think too that so this is like a Greenspan moment. For those of you who know me, know that I'm just a big aficionado of Stan Greenspan, God rest his little soul. But he would say negative affect is just as effective in terms of engagement as is positive affect. And for some of the kiddos and adults we work with, negative affect may be the better option to go with. And the other thing is giving them an if-then board, or giving them a token board, or giving them a whatever, is not going to take away the emotion that's underlying the behavior. So Courtney spoke to that really nicely when she said, you know what, if the kiddo says I don't want to, and we say, gosh, I know, my classic line is, I don't like washing my floor, but if we don't do it, we all stick to it. So I kind of like buck up and do it every once in a while. They don't need to know I have a cleaning lady. Anyway, so in that regard, they're like, oh, you mean there's stuff you don't like to do? Yeah, there's lots of stuff I don't like to do. I don't like a hill at the end of a 13-mile race at all. So it's this idea that, we're the same here. We can relate to each other, and they can see me not flipping my cork because I don't like something. And that's the other thing, is I think that when it comes to modeling, people are really nervous about modeling negation. Mm-hmm. And yet, because they like everybody to be happy all the time and be excited and want to do what they want to do. But again, unless you're living in the book The Giver, that's just not going to happen. So I think that giving credence to all the feelings is important for everybody, not just our AAC users. I think that's important for everybody. And what Stan talks about is this affect cueing, that we really get in their space and say, oh yeah, I get it. I bet this is really scary because it's something brand new. And I know when we get to brand new, you don't like it. I have a student who's just going into transition, and she was using a lot of really, really negative behavior, and parents were really scared about her going to transition, not being prepared. And I said, why don't we do a cognitive, I've been talking to them for years, this school, about cognitive picture rehearsal strip. And they finally said, okay, let's do it. What would you do? So I wrote up a couple, and it was kind of like, I'm not getting enough attention, and I don't really like it. that's her thing. You know, she really likes to kind of be in everything and feels she should be the center of it. Okay, so we'll work on changing that a little bit, but unless she can express it, and the minute we put that in place and she got a chance to say what it is that she was being so upset about, like the behavior decreased significantly, and that strip is in front of her wherever she goes. People are, and I think there's that common thing, like you said, both of you said, is people get worried that they're going to use it too much. They're going to use it too much in the beginning, in our opinion, but what ends up happening is they start to internalize that vocabulary. They can start to self-talk themselves through things, and they're more available to learning because they don't have to be using their behavior to disrupt the learning process, which I think is great. All right, so tell us a little bit about, whoops, I have to go back now. Here, I did a bad thing. I clicked twice. Never click twice. Oh, and now I'm on a black screen. Hold on. Previous.
Susan, what was the name of that strip, please?
Cognitive picture rehearsal strip. Maybe we should do a webinar on that.
I think we should. I think that would be wonderful.
Okay.
I'm writing myself a note.
Okay, that would be good. All right, so Tanya, why don't you give us a little bit about your course? Not all of it, because then nobody will take your course, but give us a little introduction to this new course that we are advertising.
So it's for parents, caregivers, school professionals about why we need a robust vocabulary system, what goes into a robust vocabulary system, what characteristics we're looking at in paper-based systems and devices, including vocabulary and layout. Some examples of students who have been, have said some things that aren't requesting using their vocabulary systems, as well as some teaching strategies and the importance of modeling and using descriptive vocabulary so we don't have to overload our systems with all of the nouns in the world.
Great. Sounds like a course I would love to take. I want to make one statement, because I do think there's a common confusion in the industry that less is more. That you work up from kids having 4 buttons, and I will tell you, we even have language systems that have this built into it. We work up from 4, and then once we have the 4, we go to the 8, and then once we have the 8, we go up to this, and it's like, holy smoly, especially for our kiddos with Rett, we're like giving them a new motor plan like every 3 months or 4 months, which seems to me to be counterproductive. And actually, if you are a kiddo with cerebral palsy with motor planning, it's not like motor planning issues are only hitting the Rett population. I have probably one of my worst motor planners is a kid with CP, plus he has CVI. And his mom always said to me, I couldn't believe how you kind of understood the apraxia. I said, oh, you should see my friends. They have a lot of apraxia. So I just think that we are fighting a current, and it's real out there. Right now, we're all preaching to the choir because the 3 of us all agree. But you would not be surprised, I'm sure, parents, about the number of times people have said, I think that's too much. You've got too many buttons on there. How do we know that he or she is saying what she really wants to say? How do we, as if language, everything that comes out of a person's mouth, we're assessing. Which, by the way, we don't do to neurotypical kids. They blather on. I have grandchildren now. When I listen to some of the things they say, I'm like, holy smoly, if these kids were considered special ed, and we're saying this with an AAC system, people would be saying, are you sure you know what you're saying? And how do they ever get to the point where they know what they're saying if we don't let them play around with words and try things out? That's what kids do. That's how they learn. And
it's babbling. It's babbling on a device, just like when kids are learning to talk. And I tell people that too. When kids are starting to speak and they're going, mama, mama, they're not calling you mama. They're saying mama, mama, and mom's coming saying, hi, mama, here I come. And every time I say mama, mama comes running, and now they're learning it. AAC is no different. A kid's going to look at go because they're babbling and exploring, and we're going to go somewhere and they're going to learn what go means. It's not any different than language learning when we're talking about speaking language.
Right. And so don't be scared about more buttons, basically. Go ahead.
I think one of my favorite stories, one of my clients, the therapist had very few buttons, and mom's like, she's not engaging with her device and everything. So I went up to work with her, and I said, okay, we're putting her on the 7x7. And I've used this video in a couple of trainings and things like that. And next morning we're sitting at their house and we're eating breakfast with grandma and grandpa, and just having a great time. She's exploring the device, we're modeling, just having a grand old time. And I get up to go get a cup of coffee, and I'm like, I'll be right back. And her mom and her grandparents got on their phones because they were talking about her schedule for the week. And she goes on the page, and she was on the feelings page, I think it was. And we had already been kind of talking on that. And when she goes to one button, realizes it's not what she wants to go, goes to the next one, looks at her mom and says, no, looks at the device and says, nobody cares about what I think. And then looks at her mom and raises her hand. And it was and her mom's like, I think she can handle the more language and the vocabulary. And I'm like, yes, I think she can. But it's just having, I will say this, Susan started me with my sister. I was very lucky to trial a device with my sister when she was 50. And Susan threw all the language at me and said, here's the Patty Judy pages, here's this, here's that, here's, this is what you do. And to hear my sister talk and to hear my sister tell me off, she was 10 years older than me, but to hear my sister tell me off, and I so deserved it because I messed up, but was the most, if she didn't have that language, if she didn't have that robust communication system, she would have never been able to do it. She would have never been able to say, you're mean, you're wrong, you're not okay, because I didn't give her the M&M and she deserved the M&M. And, but that, having that language, and even if it's a misfire or if it's a, even, and we treat it as intentional, boy, do they pick up so quickly and start using that language appropriately. And that's when, I watch our kids and I'm like, God, you are so smart. You are so much in there when you just pick up on what we're saying. And I'm like, oh, well, let's go this way. It's amazing to watch our girls and boys do that.
I totally agree. So if you have any more questions, you can email us. I'm going to come out of full screen now so people can see us as soon as I figure out how
really quick, the course is going to be $35. It's about 60 minutes long, and you'll be seeing information on it in the next week. My goal is to have it out by next week. But this will be my first time actually uploading something to Digital Chalk. So we're going to play tech, pray that the tech wizards are listening to us.
It's pretty easy. You're going to be able to do it. I know. You're going to be fine. So let me pull people over here and see if there are any questions. You can certainly turn on your cameras and say hello, or turn on your microphones and say hello.
And Stephanie said a great thing about when we were talking about language. She said, in denying linguistic access based on lack of visual access, is very true. When it comes to that, we got to have that. We have to have that robust communication system. And
So this is what I learned. This is what I learned. And I will tell you, it was such a great lesson. I was doing this consult at a high school program in Boston, severe and profound kids. I mean, this was most complex kids. And they had this boy named Ben who was blind, but had figured out that when Ben moved his eyes, even though he couldn't see anything, it was a yes. So I said, how about we get him on eye gaze, hook him up to some music, and one of those, you just move your eyes and something happens. And he would move his eyes to make the music start. And then he would move his eyes again to make the music start. I said, okay, now what we do is we do scanning, auditory scanning, and when he moves his eyes, it's going to make a selection as to what he wants to say. This is a blind kid using eye gaze. If a blind kid can use eye gaze, I guess the door's wide open for a whole lot of people with visual processing issues. Because he couldn't move anything. This was him. There was no head movement. There was no arm movement. There was no movement whatsoever except his eyes. And it was like an aha moment for me. I was like, okay, baby, we're going to try this and see how this works. So anyway.
And I always say, you don't know unless you try. I'm not going to look at anybody and say, well, this isn't going to work, because I don't have a crystal ball.
Yeah. I don't have a crystal
ball.
Assume
everybody can learn, and I'm going to find a way to make it work.
Yeah, put the onus on me. We'll try to figure it out. All right, anybody, if you have any questions that you want to ask, you want to say hi, anyways, but we're going to bug out, and this will be recorded, so if you have somebody that needs to hear it or see it, It is recorded. I actually pushed that little button and made it start. So we're happy to see you, and we're open to any ideas that you might have. Ah, yes, Sarah wants to make sure she says hi to you. Any ideas?
Zoe's got to say.
There she is. Hey, Zoe. I know. There's your Courtney. She's so funny. So any ideas you have for future webinars, we would just love to hear it. All right?
Oh, my goodness. Oh, and who is this cutie pie? Oh, it's Lily. Look at her, Lily. Hi, Lily.
Look at you.
It's not Lil. It's Hannah.
It's a Courtney fan club.
Hold on. Okay. Here.
Oh, my. Okay.
Hi.
See, I was.
This is Hannah. Hannah and Sarah.
Hi, guys. Oh,
You
my
see
goodness.
them?
I got all these
I know they're
pies.
in there.
Oh my gosh, she's so gorgeous.
Can you wave? You say hi? Are you gonna wave and say hi to them? Yeah, tell her
No,
Hannah.
I'm just
Well, that's
excited
not-
to see how cute I am.
Question
Oh
for
my
you.
goodness.
Hannah. Oh, there you go. So Hannah has CVI, and we have a Tobii AAC device, and that's what we're really messing around with. Is what the grid size is that she can handle.
Well, it would depend on her, but I have a girl with pretty severe CVI that's on Grid Supercore 30. And I will tell you what she has done now. I think because of the CVI, and we can set the eye gaze setting so that it highlights when she looks at it in a really bright color. So I can go through her CVI assessment, see what color she's attracted to, decide what it's going to highlight for her. I can also decide what it's going to highlight when I touch it. I have a lot of flexibility in Grid that I don't really have in Snap. I mean, our two favorite systems probably are Grid and Snap because they both have a search function. But you might want to try that, and you can even try the learning grids. They have these learning grids that are just topic based to give her an idea of what the function of it is. You just have to buy it extra. It doesn't come on a Tobii, but it does a 60-day trial. So I'm always really happy about that. And if you want to, I have certain settings I use for my kids with CVI. If you want to chat about that, you can just email us.
And also, depending on what page she's in, I have a couple girls who are on the 49 page set who also have CVI, who are more into phase 3, but they're using it as well. So I
49
think
on Snap,
to
right?
Play around
On Snap, 49.
Yeah.
So how do they? What kind of visual feedback are you giving them? That's the thing about Snap. I feel. Are you changing the color of those buttons because they're so dark and so hard?
Yeah, I mean, the backgrounds all changed. And again, we tried different things with her. So for this particular student, it's working. Not saying it would work for everyone.
Right.
But yes, different buttons. And, on some pages, we have different size buttons. And so we customize, as we need to.
I have a boy with Rett who's pretty on the severe end in terms of visual processing. We found it really helpful that he's in a darkened room. That's how we started. Is we've done a darkened room, so he's got shades, because any kind of light, that's what their eyes are attracted to. Even a white ceiling is going to be really exciting to them. But I always say for people to put a black background, like a trifold on the back of the device, so it blocks out all of that peripheral stuff that's going on and that kind of depth perception stuff. But also, we started with him, and I did this with my other girl that's really pretty severe. She has CP, not Rett. He has Rett. But we really worked against this dark background. But I started with them almost in not a closet, but a dark area where just the device was showing up, and they were like, "Oh, this is what I'm supposed to look at." And they got the idea of what it was for, so then we could bring it out in different atmospheres. But I would really watch your ambient lighting. Really watch that. And the other thing that people don't realize also about CVI is that there's attentional issues that are not voluntary. So a sound of some kind, and they're off looking for it. And a light coming from a direction or a movement coming from a direction, and their eyes can go follow that. And so saying look, 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 or pay attention really isn't helpful. The other thing is try not to do the same thing for any more than, like, I do it like 20 minutes, the same thing, 15, 20 minutes, because the eyes really fatigue pretty easily. So there's some tips. We actually have a CVI expert that's putting together a course for us, that actually gave a webinar with us. She's amazing. So when that's available, look for that too. We'll probably do another one of these. Yeah.
Sarah,
Okay, great.
If you go on our Rett University website, there's the two CVI webinars are on there, and then we're doing Tanya's course, like I said, hopefully this week, and then we're going to be doing the hopefully the CVI, if everything works out to the way that we need it to, will be up hopefully next month.
But don't give up. I mean, I have some kids. This young boy really loves reading. The books are on the device, and I will tell you that a lot of times words are easier than symbols. Symbols are...
Anna loves books on her AAC device.
Right, because the words are more understandable visually than symbols. Symbols are really complex. That's why photographs are the worst, because they're really kind of amorphous. There's one thing running into another thing. So line drawings are better, but words... My kids are all learning to read that have CVI. They're all learning to read. And I think it's easier for them to learn to read sometimes and write than it is for them to get things on their devices. So,
Okay.
All right. Okay.
Awesome.
I'm so glad you were here, because we had...
Yes.
This was
too.
good for you. This was good for you. Good. All right. Well, everybody, good night. Good night, Gracie. I feel like we're doing the show. And we will see you next time. Look for our next webinar. All right. Bye.
Thank you for joining us.
All righty. Bye-bye.